welcome back to the Make It Work podcast. I'm your host, Cluanny Saunders. On this podcast, we talk to inspirational people making their own work. So join us, learn with us, and let's make it work.
No matter what your role is within that team, you should be able to talk and you should feel like your voice isn't being sort of muted. If I think a play is going to be really good, I'll try and not see it. Class is very, very, very important to me when I look at work. I don't always manage to put that in my work, but it is something that is integral to me as a person. I mean, I could now think of like at least 5 off the top of my head that I'm like, these plays would be brilliant to revive now. So like if you're working on a I don't know, a Shakespeare or a new piece of writing, offset it by going to see a musical. A rehearsal room needs lots of tea and coffee.
Scott trained as an actor at Arts Ed, was a director on Birmingham Rep's inaugural Foundry program, and last year completed the National Theatre Directors course. Scott is an associate director for Pleasure Dome Theatre Company. He was recently nominated for Best Creative West End Debut at the Stage Awards for his production of Rose by Martin Sherman, starring Maureen Lipmann. This year, Rose won an Off West End Award for Best Solo Performance. So thanks so much for joining me today, Scott.
You're welcome.
I like to start usually with where you trained. I think you went to Arts Ed as an actor, is that right?
I did, yes. Many moons ago, went to Arts Ed, did a 3-year BA in acting. Yeah, and then I was an actor for a few years afterwards.
And now you predominantly direct.
Yes, yeah, yeah.
And so what was your first step into that field?
My first step was, I actually directed my first play when I was 17, 18.
Wow.
And it was attached to a youth theatre that I used to go to. I managed to get a bit of funding. It was for a scheme where it was looking at getting young people to work in different areas that they hadn't done before. And that was my first sort of attempt at directing. I say attempt because it wasn't great. And then
You're 17.
Yeah, I was 17. I'm very enthusiastic.
Great.
And then but I learned a lot from it, actually. It was a really lovely experience. But I then went to drama school, did my training, and I was focused on that. And then I sort of knew towards the end of my training that I didn't want to be an actor. And a multitude of reasons. But I sort of thought, I think I'm quite interested in still being part of sort of the theatre world, but I don't quite know how or where. And I'd done a little bit of work with young people, like community work and youth theatre work and workshops. And so I started to kind of do a bit more of that. And then one of my directors in my third year, who I became sort of acquaintances with, friends with, she asked me if I wanted to go back and assist her on a third year show at Arts Ed, which was a really brilliant experience and something that I found massively useful. And that was my it was assisting, but it was giving me a taste for what I'm now doing.
Yeah. And does being an actor make you a better director, do you think? Or having that training? I
would personally say so. I think that I know how to talk to actors. I know how not to talk to actors. I think that's quite important.
Oh, yeah.
And I feel like there's a language, there's a way of communicating something in a way that feels like you're on a level with someone, and there's an ease. And I think that for me as a director, I would never expect an actor to do anything that I wouldn't do myself. And I think that's really important. So yeah, I think it's really helped. And I think that, there's a way of explaining things that I think you can find a shortcut or a commonality on something.
Yeah. Now, I usually sort of go through someone's CV a little bit and try and like familiarize myself with, the different steps, but you work so much You have directed
Yes.
so much across the years that I honestly found it really hard to kind of like take it all in. And obviously, there's a few things that I've been to see, and there's a few things that, because you work also all over the country. So I know you have a company that you work for regularly.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Open air theatre, I believe.
Yeah, so I started working for Pleasure Dome Theatre, who are based in Exmoor predominantly, and we started working together. So I started working with the creative director Helena Payne 7-8 years ago, and we had no idea what we were doing. We sort of went down to the middle of this like cavernous open air space with a lot of enthusiasm and hope and wanting to make a brilliant piece of work. And we had never worked together before. So that was a learning experience.
How did you come to meet and collaborate?
So I was recommended for the job because someone else, another director, had to withdraw last minute.
Right.
So they needed someone else, and I was my name was suggested by a few people, which was really nice.
Obviously worked out 8 years later.
8 years later, it's worked out really, really well. And Helen and I think we built up, because we were kind of figuring things out at the same time. I think we built up a way of working together whilst sort of learning more about our individual roles, because I'd never really worked in an open air space before. It was Helena's first producing role as well as being in it. So it was a really big learning curve, and one that was very, very useful. And since then, I've directed all of their productions to date, which has been amazing. And we've really grown in size and scale, and we've been given some amazing opportunities to tour and to work with within some brilliant buildings. So it's been really good, and I really enjoy what Pleasure Dome do as a company. We work with a sort of. There's two sort of strands, I guess. One of them is telling Southwest stories.
Okay.
And presenting that to its community in and around the Southwest, or taking a story that's familiar and giving it a sort of a Southwest twist. And those are the two big sort of ways of telling stories. But in addition to that, we work a lot with actor musicians, and there's also an element where we integrate community ensembles with a professional cast. So it's a really lovely thing that's developed in terms of how we make work, why we make work, and what we make. So that's been a great experience. And it's taught me a lot about how to work on scale.
Right, because it's such a big cast.
Yeah,
huge
But
cast.
also the spaces are massive.
Of course, yeah.
And how to fill that space. And
do you tour it to different outdoor venues?
So we predominantly stay in one place,
Yeah.
which is a place called the Valley of Rocks, which is in North Devon. And it's right by the sea. It's beautiful. But you have to contend with lots of things.
I have done outdoor theater.
Yeah.
You always have to, but I can imagine if is it right on the water?
Yes.
Wow.
So lots of unexpected weather elements.
Yeah.
Also, because of where it's located, goats running across the stage, things like that. Really random. Tourists walking around, because it's a public space. You can walk around. We sort of we can't stop anyone from moving around, and there's a right to roam around there, which is really important. So there can be challenges, but also it's really brilliant in terms of the setting.
Yeah.
It's so wonderful. So we started off just working in the valley, and then I would say 3 years ago, we started to make work that wasn't solely there, work that was not just outdoors but also indoors. And now we've started to do some touring work, but still keeping a lot of the things that feel really important to us as centrally as possible. So
Right.
yeah, it's been a really, really great experience.
Yeah. One of the things I did notice that was a through line with a lot of the work that you do is that you work with new writing
Yes.
a lot. I know you have an interest in queer stories and solo work as well.
Yeah.
So what does draw you to a piece initially? I know, as I say, there's a wide variety of things.
That's a really good question. I think that for me, the piece has to speak to me, either something that sort of feels important to me as a person, something that I feel that it could be something about my identity. It could be about where I'm from. It could be about who I am or where I've grown up. It could be any of those things. But also, I think that it could be that the what the writer is saying is something that I've never heard of before in terms of a perspective. It could be, I was talking to someone about this the other day actually, and something that really excites me about work when I read it is if I think, how on earth would I stage this? Because you think that it seems not unstageable, but something that you think, wow, this is going to be challenging.
Yeah.
And that's also a real draw. But also I think that there has to be I think sometimes you can just tell things, you can tell stories just for entertainment, and that has a real place, and I think that's really important. But when you're making work that is sort of really actively trying to say something about the world that we live in, I think it's understanding A, the perspective, and B, why you are telling that story. And those things feel really, really important to me, because if I can't give myself those reasons, then I guess I shouldn't really be working on it. But things like language, if the language is exciting, or the relationships, or just the potential in the writer and what their voice is. So it's a whole range of things, I think.
And working with new writing, I know you do some dramaturg work within the project. How much are you sort of contributing to the process of actually making and constructing pieces when it is a new piece?
That varies from piece to piece. So the production that I've just finished, I'm just doing a new play in Manchester called Toxic, and I've been very much part of the process in terms of being there at the R&D process, reading various drafts, chatting with the writer, giving my thoughts, but not acting as the dramaturg on it, because there were already there were several people who kind of had those roles that they worked within. But so that was on that project. That was there was already people in place who kind of were serving that kind of, I don't want to say function, but that was their role. But still feeding in my thoughts. Whereas there was a play that I did earlier this year that I'd been developing for several years with the writer, and I was also doing the dramaturgy as well as directing it. And that is something that I quite often do in new work that I create or work on. I like that process of being there from either a conception of an idea or an early draft, and really talking with the writer and really sort of understanding what's inside their minds and why they're writing the things that they're doing, and how to then give them like feedback and thoughts about the things that they might want to develop in a slightly different direction, or things that might not be as clear. So it kind of depends on each play, and really understanding, I think, what each writer needs as well as what each play needs. So some plays or some writers might really find that structure is a kind of a strength of theirs, whereas somebody else might feel like dialogue is something that they need to work on. So really kind of pinpointing and being specific about what it is that each person or piece needs. So it varies. And that's the exciting thing as well, knowing that each play that you work on will need something different in terms of your focus.
And do you ever work with pieces that are devised? Are you working in the room to devise sections of a show?
I haven't. I love devising work. I really, really love devising work, and improv-based work as well. When I was at drama school, improvisation was something that I absolutely loved, even before drama school. I love that sense of going in with a sort of seed of an idea and then making something is really exciting. But I haven't devised as much recently, but it sometimes comes in a work. If you're doing an R&D, sometimes there is a devising element where you will throw an idea into the mix and say, could we just try this? And then that might open something up. So there is a devising element, but working on a devised piece in its entirety is something that I haven't done for a long time. I'd love to do, because again, I think for me as a creative, I'm always trying to find something to work on as well. When you're going back to what you were saying about how do you choose the work that you make, is not getting stuck in a cycle or a rhythm and going, these are the things that I always do, and always pushing yourself and going, how can I try something that I haven't done before? I'm looking at working on a piece next year. I've been talking to a performance artist about it, and it will be a piece that's in a really unconventional space that you wouldn't necessarily think a piece of theatre would take place. And then it's been a very, very light conversation, but it's really exciting because I think, okay, what is this piece going to be? So there might be an element of devising around that. So yeah, I love devising, but it's not something that we often get a chance to do, because I think there can be a bit of I think that sometimes, because when something isn't text-based, I think there can be a little bit of not a stigma, but it can just be viewed slightly differently. And I think that doesn't seem right to me, because some of the best work can come from these brilliant theatre companies that go in with that seed and create wonderful, rich work. So, yeah, I'd love to do some more devised work.
Yeah. So what does a rehearsal room look like? Or what does a rehearsal room need, in your opinion?
A rehearsal room needs lots of tea and coffee. I think that's the first thing. I think if you have a kettle in a rehearsal room and tea and coffee, it makes everyone happy.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think that's a really important thing. Working up in Manchester, there was something that we had this thing where I'm going off on a slight tangent here, but I think it's relevant, and it's something I'm going to try and do in my practice going forwards. So we had a big sort of sustainability part that was very much implemented into the way that we were working, and one of our pledges within that was that the company would try and have one lunchtime meal together a week. And someone in the company would bring in food, like a massive batch of food, and we'd all eat together. So that's something I'm going to try and do moving forwards. But like things like a tea and a coffee is just really helpful. That sounds like a basic thing. But other things that feel really important are, I think that rooms should be a place where everyone, no matter what your role is within that team, you should be able to talk. And you should feel like your voice isn't being sort of muted. That feels really, really key to me. Like it doesn't matter whether you're, I don't know, a lighting designer, you can still have an opinion on what the text is doing. Or if you're a movement director, you might have a thought about sound. And I think if there's lots of eyes and ears looking at the same thing, for me, it creates the most collaborative work. So collaboration is really important, no matter if this team is 3 people or 30. That feels so key. And I think that, so collaboration is important, people being able to feel like they can speak and bring their ideas into the room and generate ideas and contribute. Because I think it gives you ownership as well. You know what it's like when you're working on something and you're given that freedom to go, what do you think about this? As opposed to going, this is what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of alteration of language can really help a room flourish. And I think that I like there to be lots of laughter in the room.
Yeah.
I think that's really fun, especially if the material is really heavy. And that's really, really important. But thinking about when the material isn't as well, just how it can also bring about, I did a piece earlier this year, and there were some sections in it, and it was really funny. And I I remember we were finding it really hard to focus because what was happening in front of us was just so everyone was really playful, and that's really great to have in a room. People who offer ideas, play, and discover. We discover things together. So I think a lot of it is stuff that feels about collective and shared responsibility or shared ownership. So they feel like really important things to have in a room.
And do you start with a group warm-up, or how do you foster that sense of collective and everybody's in this together?
I think it depends. So some processes, I'm thinking, I'm kind of going back through what I've worked on this year. There have been a few projects where we'd start the day with a warm-up because the piece is quite physical, or it's very ensemble-led, which is really necessary, especially for a project where you're really having to be very, very physical from the get-go. But then there've been other things where instead of having a warm-up, you would just sit down for like 20 minutes at the beginning of the day and just talk. Not necessarily about the work, but like just talk, like almost like talking about like your evening or something that you might have read on your way in on the tube, or something that is just on your mind, which is also really useful. And then finding that moment with which you segue into the work is quite nice. But then also, if you're working on a piece where it's very much about, it has huge sort of thematic things or personal things for people in the room with the material, having a check-in at the beginning of the day. So all of those things have their value, and sometimes you can do all of them. Sometimes you might just read the room and go, do we need to do that? No, I don't think we do. So I think it varies as well. Like every different room will need, again, every different room, like every different play, will need something else. And I think it's about being intuitive to that and really understanding what it is, putting my agenda at the door and looking at what this really needs to function in the best way possible, I think feel really key.
Yeah. And what does your prep look like in terms of leading up to a show? I know a director's work starts long before the actors come into that room.
Yeah, I mean, so for Toxic, a lot of it was about initial sort of conversations about the script and sharing thoughts. And then when we had the R&D, we started to bring more members of the creative team in to talk about how that piece might look in terms of design. So a lot of the preparation for that, because it was a new piece of work, was reading through the piece, having conversations, talking about what it might look, move and feel like. But then, for example, I did a production of Earthquakes in London earlier this year, which like it talks about some huge themes and things that for me I didn't know about. And so therefore I had to do a lot of research and look things up. Really knowing what things mean is a big thing. So walking into the room and going, I feel confident to talk about this within a group. Or I know that some directors like to work really visually. So sometimes I'll sometimes create like, collect a bank of pictures that are relevant to the things that we're referencing. So each process is about knowing a very, very different sort of something that's going to really help the process move in a very positive way. Something that I quite often do, especially when a show's very big in scale or it's got lots of scenes, is really talk through that with the creative team in as much detail as I can before we go into the room. Or if there's a design element that really is integral to what that piece is. So for example, the piece that I did at Vault Festival, Buff. So we had no set, we had a chair. We had a fixed lighting rig. So our main design thing was going to be sound. So I chatted with my sound designer we chatted for ages actually. We'd worked together before and we said, what does this sound, what's the sound of this piece like? What's the music telling us? What's the tone of it? and we sort of just bounced ideas for about 3 or 4 hours, and then we kind of hit on the idea that we were like, that's the one. So it varies. Sometimes it needs to be about conversation. Sometimes it's a lot more about being by yourself and just really working through something. Like it could be a concept.
Yeah.
Or it could be knowing what that phrase means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you were just talking there about sound designer. So this is why I'm asking this question. Do you get to bring people with you that you've worked with and you really love their work, or are you usually sort of presented with a team, or does that vary as well? Maybe?
Yeah, that does vary. I mean, more often than not, my experience so far is more often than not, it might be someone that I have. So the sound designer that I was just referencing is someone that I'd worked with on. We met for a coffee just over about 18 months ago, actually. And it was just like a general chat. And we were talking about the things that we liked in terms of work and references. And it was quite clear in that conversation that I thought we'd work well together. And then there was a project that I thought, yeah, this would be great for you and great for us to kind of our first collaboration. And then actually what then happened is we ended up working on 2 projects together. And then this third project came up, and because we'd worked so well together, he was the person that I thought, we've built up a really good way of working. And sound is really, really important. So I think there is that thing of working well with people, but also knowing that if there's a certain type of designer or certain type of creative that I think that they would be best suited to this type of project. So there have been like so many amazing creatives that I've worked with, but making sure that you get the right fit for what you need in that is really important. And the piece that I've just worked on, it was the largest creative team that I've ever worked with. And I'd never worked with anyone before, which is a very, very unusual situation for me to be in, because if I'm working with a team of people, there'll always be probably at least one person that I've worked with before, because there's a shorthand.
Yeah.
But yeah, it changes. And I think that's really, again, really, really important to me, is to have the people that that you work with again, but also not making it a closed shop and being like, these are the only people that I'll ever work with. So I think it's about striking that balance and kind of finding that happy medium with that.
Yeah. So what makes a good collaborator? You mentioned that you thought this person was a good collaborator. I mean, I know that varies for people. Some people are like, you need the conflict. Some people are like, you have to be on the same page. What do you think?
I think it's both. I think it's both of those things. I think it's about being really honest when you're viewing something very differently. But then also, I think within that, sort of being able to really talk about why you're seeing it differently. And I think that when you see things in a very similar way, you kind of, what that's telling me is you're interpreting what I've read, what we've both read, in a very similar way, which, okay, that's going to make this process not easier, but we're already from the off, we're already looking at it in the same way. So I think a really good collaboration is massively about communication. It's massively about saying when you're not understanding something or where something's coming from. It's about being able to say, I don't think that this might be the most suitable thing to have there, or I don't think that I don't know, that lighting state is, I don't understand that. Why is that there? Why is that colour? Or so kind of really, it's about getting in each other's minds in a creative sense and really understanding the decisions that you make. So collaboration, yeah, it's about communication, but also, and it's about a kind of fluidity in that communication. And I think that sort of I've had this idea about this, and making a note of it and sharing it back is really useful. So it's communication feels really key.
So I want to move on to talking about Rose, which was a piece that you directed with Dame Maureen Lipmann. And it also got you a stage debut nomination.
Yes.
Yes. And an Off West End award. Am I right there?
Yeah. So it won Best Solo Performance at the Offies this year.
Amazing. Can you tell me how that project came about?
That was a lockdown creation. So I was chatting to a producer that I know about work and about how work could still be made within the confines of being in and out of a lockdown or and a pandemic. And we had a conversation about streaming, because obviously streaming isn't a new thing, but the way in which things were being streamed it seemed to be evolving in a different way because people didn't have access to live theatre. So what happened was I think what happened, we were talking about work and things that might work in a sort of streamed environment. And I think that they were specifically looking for a one-person piece. I think from a practical point of view and a safety point of view, but also when things are uncertain, I think financially it makes sense. So we were chatting about that, and then I said, I know this play that I think would be really, really brilliant to revive. And then I mentioned it to them, and that's when we got the ball rolling. And it happened very quickly and very unexpectedly in terms of Martin, the writer, saying yes to us streaming it, and Maureen saying yes to performing in it. And then it just, it sort of became this thing that I really didn't anticipate it to be where it is now. Not because I don't believe in the work, but because I just thought, after sort of like the world sort of is shut down, things will just resume itself and that project will be put in a drawer. And that's what I genuinely thought that. So I feel really lucky that it's had such a sort of a trajectory like that. But also I think it shows that sometimes sticking with something can and sort of sticking with something and really believing in the longevity of something, it's not just about okay, that's it, and allowing that process, because the way in which we kind of every time we revisited the piece, there was a different perspective in terms of what it said about the world. So it was it was a surprise, but a really pleasant surprise in terms of working on this piece. So it was initially a lockdown project where I remember Maureen and I would rehearse in her garden, partly again for a sort of safety aspect, because it was an open space, but it meant that she didn't have to travel anywhere, and that there was an ease there. And then when we were just before we filmed up in Manchester, she was back filming on Coronation Street, and I would meet her on days that she wasn't, and we'd sit in a greenhouse in Media City and just like eat chips and to rehearse the piece. And that's what I think was really, that felt really right actually for that piece, because it's such a delicate play, and it's her in a very exposed way. So building that sort of trust and bond in a unconventional way actually really worked, and I feel like it's paid off.
And just out of interest, was it you who approached her and the writer, or was it the producer?
The producers, yeah. So that all went through them, and I sort of just went along for the ride.
Yeah,
I was just happy to be there.
Yeah.
They sort of led on all of that stuff.
And I'm also interested because I'm always looking I'm always looking out for that play that I'm like, I have to produce this.
Yeah.
What are you just constantly reading plays and just trying to file them away for that day that someone asks you, what are you thinking of doing? Or
Yeah, I mean, I have two, I get two, possibly three sort of, I guess, Rolodexes of things. One of them are plays, existing plays. I have like hundreds. I've got a huge library of plays. And there's always plays that I'm thinking, I mean, I could now think of like at least 5 off the top of my head that I'm like, these plays would be brilliant to revive now. But then I also have like new plays, a collection of new plays that I think it's a shame that they haven't found a home. So I sort of, there's lots of things that I'm always trying to get off the ground, really. So it kind of, I think it's, I think I do have quite a good capacity for remembering plays and understanding why those plays are important to tell. And I think that Rose was one of those plays. And another play that I sort of revived, I think 2 years before Rose, was a Simon Stevens play called Country Music. And it was an early Simon Stevens play, and one that in the kind of whole catalogue and brilliant works of Simon Stevens sort of is one that isn't remembered as much. Mm-hmm. And I think I like those sorts of plays that can sometimes go under the radar and you go, oh yeah, that play was really brilliant actually. And doing something like Country Music it's a play that I'd love for like, I think I read it like 15 years ago and thought, this is brilliant. And if ever I get an opportunity to direct this, I'm going to absolutely seize it. And then an opportunity came up and I thought, yeah, this is the play that I'm going to pitch. So I think it's about going into any meeting. If I have a meeting with a producer or an artistic director, always going in with 3 or 4 ideas and then sort of testing them out and going, is this the one that you want? Is this one? And sometimes it could be the last one or the one that is the most left field. That is the one that excites them or interests them. So I think, yeah, always having a few things in your, thinking about why it excites you, why you, going back to that thing about why me and why now. That's really key.
Yeah. And do you also collect those plays from things that you've seen that you're like, oh, in 10 years I'm going to revive that?
And that's a really good question. That's a really, really good question, because I try as much as possible. This might sound a bit weird, but like if I think a play is going to be really good, I'll try and not see it. Because I sort of think I don't want to be influenced by that. Because if that production is really amazing, then where do I go? And you've got a lot to that. I mean, a play that I would absolutely love to direct, which I did see, and it was superbly directed, and I don't know how I would be able to. It's not about doing a better version, but it's just about doing something different, because that version is so etched in my mind. That's what it is. It's because that version's etched in my mind. I saw the original version of Posh at the Royal Court, Lindsay Turner's production, and it was just phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. It blew me away. It made me really angry. It sort of made me kind of want to go out in the streets and scream, and it really examines privilege in a way that class is very, very, very important to me when I look at work. I don't always manage to put that in my work, but it is something that is integral to me as a person. And I think that is a play that I would love to be able to revive at some point. But the original production was phenomenal. And also then it transferred and they made a film of it. So yeah, there was a show that I directed. There's something that I saw, or something that I think there's something that I've seen that I have directed, and I think I very consciously separated my thoughts on that piece to the version that I saw. But yeah, it's I try not to see something that I really want to direct.
I love that. Well, I think that's such an interesting concept.
I'm also a really bad theatre goer at points as well. I've tried to improve because I used to, and actually refocusing my brain in that way is, I think, really paid off. Because I think, I don't know if you have this, is that when I've been sat in a room, if you've been sat in a room from like 10 till 6, watching people pretend to be other people, and the room's dark, or you're in a tech or something like that, the last thing I want to do in the evening is go and watch people pretend to be other people. Oh. And it's not because I dislike theatre, it's because it can be an overload. However, I've now sort of tried to reframe that and use that as a way to not think about what I've been doing in the room. Mm-hmm. So it's less about, why would I want to go and do that, and more about, oh, actually, this gives me a bit of headspace from the piece that I'm working on, which has been actually quite eye-opening. Just that little reframing of that has been really good.
Yeah. I suppose, otherwise it could be a bit of a busman's holiday. So, yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think it is, and also seeing something that another thing that I have found interesting is not always just going to see theatre. So if you're seeing, I don't know, I don't work on musicals, but I would love to work on musicals. I do a lot with actor musicians, but no sort of outright musicals. So like if you're working on a I don't know, a Shakespeare or a new piece of writing, offset it by going to see a musical. Or if you're working on a revival, maybe going to see a new piece of new writing. So those sorts of things. So there's a differentiation between the thing that you're doing and the thing that you're seeing. Like I remember working on something relatively recently, and I went to see a piece of dance. So that was a really nice way of still feeling connected to a piece of live performance, but it's different.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a big proponent of seeing the biggest variety of theatre that you can. You know, for me, it's trying to find people who I can rope into going to see stuff with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Usually just end up going by myself.
Yeah.
Being like, I want to go see this guy do this thing, you know, in this unconventional space. And it's more...
Who wants to go with me?
Yeah, who wants to go? And everyone's like, no, blah, blah, you know.
Yeah.
And then I come back and I say, well, it's brilliant. You guys missed out.
Yeah.
You know, that's good. So what is happening next for you?
So I am going to Taunton next week, and I start rehearsals for A Christmas Carol. Well, I've sort of started rehearsals already. Our youth ensemble, which are really integrated into the show, they started their rehearsals last week, and I was there for part of their rehearsals. But I start the main body of rehearsals in like a week and a half. So I'm doing Christmas Carol at the Brew House in Taunton, and it's a actor-musician-led piece with a large, very large youth ensemble that are very integrated into the new version of this story. So that will take me up until pretty much the end of the year. Great. And then a bit of a break.
Yeah. Christmas, around Christmas or after?
No,
Christmas?
around Christmas, yeah. Christmas. So get Christmas, and it'd be really nice.
And so if you had some advice for someone who's thinking they'd like to direct something, do you have any advice for them? Yeah,
I'd say think about the work that you like. Think about the things that you see. So if you're a performer, think about the work that you might be doing that you like, and that might influence the sort of work that you might want to make as a director. But also thinking about if you're seeing work and say you have a very, very different career and you want to step into becoming a director, but you do see theatre, think about the type of work that you're seeing that you enjoy, but thinking about why you're enjoying it. Is it the writing? Is it the direction? being really specific about that might help you unlock some things. So maybe thinking about the type of work is useful, but also getting started can be the biggest challenge, the first thing about the first gig. And I think it's really important. This is more about my personal way in, which I found useful. And some of it is about kind of subsequent stuff. Is an assisting job is a good kind of foundation and a good way to learn. I learnt loads from every assisting job that I've ever done, because every director was working in a different way. And I know that can sound sort of easier said than done. Oh, just get an assisting job, like it's that easy. Because people can apply for things and it can not sort of happen. But also things which is, for me, a more recent thing, is writing to people and asking if you can just observe in their room. Because sometimes that can take a step in a direction that you don't anticipate. So I've had a few instances this year where people have come into my room to observe, and that's been brilliant experience in terms of, as well, those people feeding back about what they've noticed about my process, because I'm always about learning how to evolve and asking those people about, what did you notice? So observing in people's room can be good, because that also that's nothing that's sort of, I learn from seeing. So observing for me is a valuable tool. Some people learn from reading a book, and that's all valid. So observing is good. Assisting is obviously a really useful skill to build, and working and supporting a room. But also another way in can be if there's like scratch nights or rapid response evenings where you've got like these small 10-minute plays that you have an opportunity to be able to present something. So that's also a good way to sort of really, it's a good way to experiment and sort of try a rehearsal technique out, or work with a type of text that you're less familiar with. Research and development's doing an R&D. That's also a way to sort of start gaining experience. So those sorts of things are the ways that I would say you can sort of gain experience or dip your toe without having to do a big formal training. Because I never trained as a director, so a lot of what I was learning was as I was going. All my actor training was something that would come into play. Because also as well, I think that there's a lot to be said for what you learn as a performer, because there's a lot of transferable stuff. So a lot of the technique are things that I learn when I was training, but then also as an actor when I was jobbing. So I think that I think another thing as well that's really important is I understand that if you're a director, as someone who does do it, I don't do it as much now, but like applying for things takes time, and it can be really, really sort of disheartening if you apply for 30 jobs and then you get a no for all of them. So I think maybe not applying for everything, because obviously you have to survive as well. You need to be able to pay the bills. You need to be able to live. So maybe being really specific about what you're applying for, that might help. Because also as well, it's just good to, again, if you're writing to someone, be really specific about why you're writing to them. Understand why you're writing to them. Did you see that show that they directed or wrote that really said something to you? So those sorts of things I think are useful. Workshops are useful. If you can participate in workshops that aren't necessarily too expensive, I think that's also a really useful thing to engage with. And
with companies.
With companies, you might have a director that is running a director's workshop.
Right.
Or you might have a theatre company that might be running a residency of some sort of capacity. So I think those sorts of things can also be useful.
Yeah, I think I have a perception, and perhaps it's not true, that if I haven't already directed a lot, there would be, scores and scores of people that have and are applying for those same things.
There are quite a lot. There are quite a lot of people, and I think it's very similar to being an actor. Like, there are lots of people applying for the same thing. I think that the difference is that when you think about being an actor, if you're applying to be in a company of 10 people, there's 10 roles that are available. If you're applying to be a director or an assistant, there's one role available. Yeah. So it's kind of proportionately, it's sort of quite similar.
Yeah.
I think that something as well, which is really important when you're applying for things, it's not just about always outlining what it is that you would gain from it. It's also about talking about what you would contribute. That's a really important thing.
Yeah.
Because it's an exchange. I will gain this, but I will also offer this. And that can be just sometimes really thinking, again, specifically about what the application or the brief is. Because if it's a generic thing, and I know I've been guilty of this, writing a generic cover letter, and then you're like, that's just another cover letter, and people can spot that.
Yeah. So
yeah, those would be some of the things that I would say. There's a variety of things, but also asking people to meet them for a coffee. That can feel very scary about meeting. Like, obviously, like, maybe if you're just starting to kind of think about directing, writing to an artistic director and being like, do you want to go for a cuppa? That might not be the most suitable thing to do at that time, but finding a way, or a kind of a way that doesn't feel as daunting, but also feels achievable, might be a way to kind of think about that.
Yeah. I think a coffee's always, people are so willing to help, really. Or
Absolutely.
just have a chat, aren't they?
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing, having a chat. And if sometimes someone doesn't get back to you, it might be because they're working on something, they're kind of quite consumed with that. Or it could be that they might not have got the email. Like, sometimes things go to spam, and I've had things that have gone into like my outbox or my spam box, and I go, oh, I'm really sorry, I just didn't pick that up. So sometimes just giving that a little bit of space is fine, but also finding that balance of knowing when to email, when is appropriate, like the time in between emails, just kind of judging that a little bit and kind of being aware and sensitive to that is important.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. This has been really informative.
No worries. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us for this new season of the Make It Work podcast. Hit the like or subscribe button to get more inspirational videos like this one. We put more info and behind the scenes stuff on our Instagram at Make It Work Podcast UK. And if you had any questions or comments about the show, you can email us at makeitworkpodcastuk@gmail.com.